Hello everyone, um, this is CCCS121 Programming 2 at the University of Jeddah. Um, so today we're going to do- see three different things. So far all the classes that you've seen contained in them as member variables, primitive data types, meaning um, integers, strings, characters, double precision floating point numbers, long integers, and so on. Just the basic um, data types, the primitive data types that Java comes with. But classes can also contain inside them uh, objects of other classes as member variables. And that is basically what the next example that I'm going to walk you through today, um, uh, that is going to demonstrate. So the example we're going to work with is going to contain two classes. The first one is a class called student, and the second one is one called library card. So basically, a library card is like an account that you have with a library. And the student class contains as its data members a variable called name, which is just a string, and an email address, also string for that student. We have a student constructor, of course, and we're going to keep this very basic. We'll give this class will have um, uh, another four methods, two get methods for email and name, and two set methods again for email and name. So uh, these get and set methods to access member variables of a class. There's another name for that. Also call these accessor methods, methods to access member variables of a class. The member variables, as you can see, they have minus signs in front of them, which means they're private. You cannot access them directly from the outside. You cannot just use the object name, put a dot after it, and say dot name and get access to whatever name string is being stored in that object. Instead, you have to use a proper method, in this case, get name, to access that name string. Same thing for the email. So this is pretty straightforward. Nothing special to this student class that we'll make. But then we have this library card class. This is kind of this an object of the library card will represent an account uh, at the library, and it has also two data members. The first one is called owner, and the owner is, check this out, an object of the class student. And then we have a borrow count. So this is basically the number of books that have been checked out from the library, and that is an integer. Both of these data members of the library card will also be private. And then we have a couple of methods according to this UML class diagram. The library card constructor, uh, checkout, which is basically a method that will add the given number of books to the borrow count. Uh, get number of books, which is basically a method that returns the value of borrow count, how many books you have that student has checked out. Get owner name returns a string, and that string is going to be the name of the student that owns this library account. Set owner is a method that allows you to pass a new student object and basically change the owner on an account at that library. And then we have something else. This is kind of special. This is a method called toString. Okay. Now, the fun part is that actually the interesting part is not so much fun, but uh, the toString method is one of those methods that every class already uh, contains. And when we get to the topic of inheritance, um, parent classes, superclasses, we'll talk more about the toString method. Um, but you can really, all you have to know at the moment is that the toString method is a member method of every class, whether you write it or not. A little bit, uh, not exactly the same, but yeah. So I won't say much more about about it at this point. So let's start coding. So I already have a project over here. I'm calling this on week 5.3, last lecture of week 5 of our semester. And I'm going to start with a student class. So I'll go over here. This is my package week underscore 5 underscore 3, and I'm going to add a new class called student. By the way, this is kind of the last time I'm going to, because as we proceed, our examples are going to get longer and longer, which means the videos will become longer and longer. Um, so uh, up to this point, I mean, you've seen plenty of examples um, of classes that we've made. Um, so if something is very basic and is something that we've done many times before, I'm just going to copy paste that code over here instead of typing and explaining each line as I type it, because, like I said, that'll take too much time. So the student class has two member variables. They're both private. The first one was a string variable called name. The other one, according to the UML class diagram, is a private, also string variable, this one called email. And we're done with the member variables. So just as a matter of habit, maybe also get into the habit of commenting your code. So variables come first, then come methods. So I'm just doing some very basic commenting just to show you what this is supposed to look like. And so among the methods, so all methods were public. The first one was the constructor method, and all we're going to do in this one is um, we're just going to initialize name and email member variables to something other uh, than null strings or empty strings. Okay, and after that, the student class was pretty straightforward. We have a get name accessor method, which just returns the name. Similarly, we'll have another accessor get method to access the email stored in that student object, and of course corresponding um, accessor methods to set name, sorry, it's got less, change the name, and another public method to change the email address. And there you go, we're done with this class. Okay, as you can see, very basic stuff. Constructor for two member variables, four accessor methods. Common sense stuff. Uh, let's move on to the next class. Next class was called library card. Okay, there you go, library card. So this one too had two member variables. The first one is a private um, object of type student, the class that we just made, and we're going to call this one owner. Second one is a private integer that tracks the number of books that a student has checked out on his account. Um, Among member methods, there is the constructor. Um, Not going to do anything in the constructor at the moment. Not much that needs to be done. Borrow count is an integer, which means Java will automatically initialize it to a 0. Okay. All right. So we had a public method called checkout, which basically adds a certain number of books to the borrow count. Okay, got that. Then we had another public method to read the borrow count. This will return an integer, of course. There you go. We had another public method that returns a string. The string being the name of the owner on that account. So this will return, check this out. So owner, which is of type student, of an object of class student. Now the name contained in the student object is private. The way to get to it is using the getName method. And as you can see, if you do everything right, if you define a class before you use it, you get this nice auto-completion feature in the IDE, right? So get owner name, and then we also had a method that allowed us to change the owner, but we're not just providing a string for that, we're providing an object of type student. Call this one S. There you go, and this will be owner equal to capital S, S for student. Okay, and then the last one was a public method that returns a string, and this method had this slightly weird name, toString. What a toString method does is basically it returns a string, as the name says, which contains the values of all the data contained in that object, but nicely formatted in a way that it makes sense to the viewer. So what we're going to do is we're going to return a string, a fairly long string actually, and it's going to show the owner name, owner dot, sorry, there you go, get name, returns the name, and like I said, we're going to format this nicely, and on the next line it's also going to return, print out the email address, use the get email method, and what else do you think might be important? How about the number of books the student has currently borrowed on his account, his or her account? So the borrow count, and that's it. This will make for some for useful output. So this is what we're going to do. This is how we are going to format this string returned by the toString method. And we're done with our second class, library card. Let's get back to uh, our main method. And so now that we have this library card class, which has among its members, data members, uh, well, yes, an integer, but also um, an object of class student, of type student. Let's see how that works. Let's see how we can use these. So let's not going to do anything too complicated. Um, so let's define some variables that we're going to use in the beginning. So I'm going to use loops. I already planned that. So I'm going to declare a counter variable used to count loop iterations I. And so a good habit is to uh, often is actually to write your comment first, a comment that explains what you're going to do next, and then follow that up with the actual code. So let's say I'm going to create a student object and initialize it. Okay. So how do I create a student object? Student, let's call this one S1. Now this is just a declaration. Let's actually create it by a call to its constructor. I could have done this in one line, of course, you know that. This doesn't contain any information yet, so I'm going to use the set name method to put a name in here. Hussein Al-Sharbatwi, for example. And remember, this class also has a set email method. So I'm going to provide an email address over here, sharbatli@uj.edu.sa. Okay, so we have created a student object and initialized it. We've given values to its two member variables, name and email. Next, let me create two library card objects. And yeah, let me just do that. So library card, first one's card 1, second one will be card 2. So I just start off by just declaring them, and let me now actually create them. So card 1 is a new library card. And I'm just going to copy and paste that and make the second library card. Done. And then I'm going to make the student that I just created in the form of an object. I'm going to make the student owner of both cards. How do I do that? Remember, the library card class had a method called setOwner. See? And in it, I pass as argument a student object, the student object S1 that I just created up here. Done. And because I want to make the same student owner on both accounts, I do the same thing for card 2. Okay. And you know what? also going to, right after I create the first library card, I am also going to check out 3 books. Okay. All right. So let's uh, let's take a look at the uh, the information I have. Let's make use of the toString method. Use the toString method on both cards. So I actually thought about this a little before, so I want to um, format the output here a little nicely, some idea of where I'm going. So what we're going to do is I'm going to print out, I'm going to use the toString method a couple of times. Um, card1 info to display that. Card2 info, display that too. And in between, I'm going to print out card1 dot toString, whatever that returns. There will be a blank line. Then I go to card2, do the same thing for card2. Card2 dot toString method. As you can see, as you can see now, auto completion. If you do things in the right order, um, start from the bottom, the smallest classes that you're going to use in the bigger classes. If you do that in the right order, um, auto completion in the IDE can save you some time of typing. So let me run this. Let's just see if the output is actually works. There you go. So here's the initial status of card1 info, and these 3 lines are output produced by calling the toString method on card1 on a library card. Owner name Hussain Al Sharbatli, email is sharbatli@uj.edu.sa. The information that I put in here when I initialize the student object, right? And the number of books borrowed on this account is 3 because I called the checkout method on card1. For card2, same student info, same student name, same email address, but the number of books borrowed on that account is still 0. Okay, that is possible because I checked out books on one account, not on one card, not on the other. Okay. Now, here's the thing that I want to show you. Just copy, paste this whole thing, the output, call the next one after, and before and after. And in between, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to make a change to the student object S1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the email address for that student in the student object. And let's say Hussain Sharbatli changes his email address. Let's say he gets his own email server. I actually starts his own company, and now his email address is hussain@sharbatli.com. Earlier it was a UJ email address. Okay, so I'm changing the email address in the student object. Okay, that's it. That's the only change I'm making. Let's see what happens when I call the toString method on the library card 1 and on card 2. There you go. So here's the before output, that's still the same as before. And then after I make the change in the email address, check this out. On card 1, the email address is automatically updated. On card 2, the email address is also updated to hussain@sharbatli.com, to the new email address. I did not have to pass the new changed student object. I did not have to copy that in any sense into the library card objects. Yet, I made a change in the student object, and that change is also visible in the library card objects, in both library card objects. How is that possible? How does that work? That's one of the things I wanted to demonstrate, and this is basically what is described in much more detail in the slides. What is actually happening, and I'll show you the key slide that explains what's going on over here. Second, this is basically what's going on. We created one student object, S1 in our case. Over here in memory, we created a library card and another library card, card 1 and card 2 actually. Now, when you make an object a member variable of another object, like we did, it is not the case. So we do the library card object over here is not getting its own copy of the student object. Instead, the member object that it has is actually just a pointer. It's just a link to the original student object. So any change that I make in here, like a change in the email or a change in the name, when I try to access that field, that member variable of student, from inside library card, it will take me to this object, to the student object. Whatever change I made in here from the last time, that will be reflected, that will be visible or visible from that library card. Same thing from the other card. Remember, I said when I called the setOwner method for library card, for both of them, I provided the same student object, S1. Here as a reminder, here, card 1, setOwner, and I passed it S1, student object S1. And I did the same thing for card 2, which means that the owner member variables of both library cards, card 1 and card 2, they're both pointing to the same student object S1 in memory. So any change I make in here will also be accessible or visible from both of these objects, card 1 and card 2. And that is why, after I change the email address of the student in the student object, and I call the toString method on card 1 and card 2, afterwards, I see the new student email address over here. Because when we call the getEmail method of student from inside the toString method of the card, we are accessing the new value, the new email address string. So that was one thing. That was basically showing you that objects in Java, objects are passed by reference. We don't pass copies of an entire object when we give an object as an argument to a method. We only pass in a reference, an address to that pre-existing object somewhere else in memory. So the other thing, take a look at that. Um, the other thing I wanted to show you is about making arrays of objects. Okay, there's a nice, very neatly explained example in the slides, and this is the last topic on these slides. If you've looked ahead, there's basically a three-step process to making an array of objects of a certain class. So since we already have a couple of two classes handy, I am just going to continue from here and just going to extend this example now. Okay, so this is going to be about making an object array. Okay, so let's do that. Making an object array of student. Okay. So let's begin with something simple. So let's say I want to make an array of student objects, student array, SA. And this is going to, let's say this array is going to be 10, contain 10 objects. Okay. So what I've done is I've basically made a reference to the entire array. Now each element of that array itself um, is an object. I could have done the same thing, by the way, as I said, three-step process. I could actually also do this in 3 steps like this. 1, declare, create, and now I have to still allocate memory for each of these 10 student objects that I have in here, in this array, that make up this array. So for the first element, for first student object, I say SA0 is equal to new, and now I call the student constructor that will create one student object. And guess what? I have to do the same thing for the second student object, and the same thing for the third SA2 student object. You can see that this can get tedious. So like I said in the beginning, I already knew this was going to happen, so instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a loop. I can actually do this quite easily by having a loop over here. So blow these away. SAI, so because I'm doing the same thing just for different index values, and I'm going to do this for 10 objects, and this will create 10 student objects. Okay. Now you see that I have to put the number. I have to put the array size. I have to put that in here twice. If at some point, let's say these two lines of code, this one and this one, are very far apart inside my program, oftentimes it might be that I update this number in one place when I change the size of the array but not in the other. So to avoid such a mistake, a more elegant method would be to just say, you know what, SA dot length. SA is an array after all, so I can use the length property on that. So SA dot length, less than SA dot length, which is the same, which is 10 in this case, specified over here. And instead of writing this in 4 lines, I want to reduce this even further. I could just write this like this. As you can see, 3 lines are enough to create this whole array of 10 student objects. Okay, so, sorry. So after the student objects are created, they're not initialized, of course, so I still have to put some interesting or useful information in there. So I'm just going to use the, hold on, that's SA0 dot, and then I can call the set name method. I'm going to put in Hossein bin Daoud as the name on the first student, and email address, set email address is going to be san at uj.edu.sa. And when I'm done with that, I can repeat the same thing for the second guy in SA1. That guy is going to be Saad bin Daoud with email address saad at uj.edu.sa. And if I want to continue that, I can do that for SA2. Let's say this guy is going to be, I don't know, let's say Murtaza Khan. This is going to be Khan at uj.edu.sa. Okay, and so on. I don't have to go on. I can just leave the other student objects in this array uninitialized, or let them be initialized by the student classes constructor. And what I also want to do is I also want to print out all of the members, all of these student objects in this student array. I want to do that. So guess what? I'm going to use a loop again, and going to do this the elegant way. System dot out dot print. Okay, let's just for nice formatting, put an empty line there. There's going to be more stuff in here. There you go. And I'm going to print out SA, and then the index, the student number, right? And then I'm going to print out SAI dot get name, print out the name and the guy's email address, and that's it. And this will run for as many times or as long as the array SA is. That's all I want. So let's see, let's take a look. Does it work as well as it, so before, after, this is the code from before. And here you go. Essay 0, name Hussein bin Dawood, just like I made it over here, with email address hussein@ud.edu.sa. Second guy was Saad bin Dawood, saad@ud.edu.sa. There you go, Saad bin Dawood. And the third guy was Murtaza Khan@ud.edu. Same thing. And after that, I stopped putting stuff. I stopped initializing student objects, and you can see they end up retaining the name and email address that I initialize them with in the student classes student constructor. Name unassigned, email address unassigned at ud.edu.sa. Alright, so it's a nice explanation for how object arrays work in the slides that are uploaded. Made some changes. I just updated them earlier today. Make sure you download the new version of the presentation slides, and that's it. I'll try to upload the in-class programming task um, in the next hour or so. Okay, so I'll see you all tomorrow.